We are back, and we are ready to serve up a great podcast.
So at this point, I think regular viewers will know Nick always tries to wind me up at the beginning of every podcast. He does something crazy when I come on our little recording studio. And today I open it up and he's like in the ready position with a racket. And I lost it. I couldn't hold it in. But welcome back, Nick. I'm back home. It feels so good to be back with my own
You are back in your own place. You're not in some hotel room in Fort Lauderdale, and you are out of the Miami humidity.
Yes to all those things. And as much fun as it was traveling around with the tour, I think there was definitely a moment there where I thought, oh, I could do this. I could just follow the tour around the world. But after, I think it was 2 days before I was due to come back home, I was like, I'm ready. I'm ready to go back home and live a regular life and eat. Oh, and that was another thing. And just eat food that I make and I cook.
And that
I didn't realize I would miss that
and
the most.
Doesn't have the calorie count of a slaughterhouse.
Exactly. Exactly. But I'm back. And in this episode, we're going to sort of recap a little bit what the Sunshine Double was for the Ground Pass podcast and talk about a little bit of our future and where we're going. Because I remember when I asked Nick to do this with me, it was very much let's just make a podcast and, low risk. It's once every 2 weeks and let's just see where it goes. But I've really had a lot of fun doing it. And I've met a few people, some of my friends in real life and some people online who are so appreciative of a podcast like this. They're like, oh, I didn't know that. Or, oh, thank you so much for sharing these updates with me or letting me know where I could watch matches and things like that. So it's been very fun, very exciting. We're going to keep going, but we're going to do things a little bit differently. Right, Nick?
Yeah, I'd say so. And the main thing we want to focus on a little bit more is the experience of attending, because I think at this point we've explained as much as we can about the game of tennis. We'll probably refer back to maybe previous podcasts or might cover something again just in case we get some brand new listeners, but we're not going to be as in depth. So you might hear us say something like, please refer to episode 6 or something like that. But I think for those of us who are newer fans or getting into the swing of attending tournaments, we want to talk a bit more about what it's actually like to go. Like, Grounds Pass is about being on the ground. And that's, for me, that's the most important thing in sort of engaging, kind of enjoying the game to its fullest. Yeah, we'll still probably tell you where to watch and things like that. But it's an easy way of following the tour and getting involved. And I've had a lot of fun on my Twitter this last week asking people for their experiences of tournaments that are coming up, which I think I've tagged you in one or two of those. And that's been a lot of fun hearing those kind of stories. And that's the kind of thing we want to start sharing.
Right, definitely. And, because there are a lot of tips and tricks. Like when I started going to the US Open years and years ago, I didn't know. I just bought, because you kind of just do what it seems like the best thing to do. You're like, oh, I'll just buy a ticket to Arthur Ashe. And, the cheapest tickets are way up top. So you're seeing the players really small. And I could have been better served by, going to the free fan week and, going to a smaller court and getting a ground pass and doing all that stuff. But I didn't know, because you don't know what you don't know. So I think we would love to be here to help spread that information. And, Nick and I cannot be at every tournament, not yet, at least. Not yet, but Nick and I cannot be at every single tournament. So I think part of what we would also like to do is what Nick kind of did a little bit on his Twitter this week was bring in listeners of the podcast, fans of the podcast who have been to these tournaments, and maybe get little tips and tricks from them about tournaments they love and tournaments they've been to, and share that information, because sharing is caring.
Indeed. And something we should probably start doing is tell you a bit more in advance as possible about attending these tournaments. Something we just start thinking about is Roland Garros is the next Grand Slam. That's probably going to be on a lot of people's lists to attend. So what are your top
Yeah.
tips for Roland Garros? Because neither of us have been before. It's probably easier for me to get there than
No.
Anastasia because I'm geographically closer to Paris, but I've never been.
Yeah. And maybe we can get, a fan on who's been to Roland Garros and can let us know what it was like. But stay tuned for more stuff coming, and we'll keep you guys updated. But, and I know some people, like, for example, when we did like scoring in tennis, like how to score things like that. And from time to time, that stuff will still come in, but we're going to be more tournament focused in attending tennis tournaments and seeing it live. And also realistically letting you know where to watch tennis, because it can be so confusing. And no more so than this week, I think, when a lot of people I saw on Twitter were trying to see how they could watch the Houston Open. And it's really funny because I think sometimes, tennis Twitter is tennis Twitter. And I know so many people complain. They're like, why is tennis not just on regular, channels like ESPN? And then finally tennis was on ESPN and they're like, why is it not on Tennis Channel? We're never happy. Okay. This is what I've learned. We're never happy, but no, so many people just didn't know where to watch it. And if we can help that process, we're going to be here to help the process.
Yeah, that's what we're here for. Also, in addition to check out our episodes, we are going to have a website soon.
Wow. We're on the up and up, guys. Not only are we going to have a website, we have an email as well. But so let's get into it. Quick recap of the Sunshine Double edition, going to those tournaments, what it was like for me as someone who attended. Is I definitely prefer Indian Wells. Let's just call a spade. Indian Wells is such a beautiful tournament.
That's it. We're never invited back to Miami.
I know. That's it. We're done. But here's the thing. I like Miami as well. They're so different. And it's funny because players always talk about the conditions and how different playing in Indian Wells is on court is different from playing in Miami. It is the same for the fan. It is a completely different vibe, but there's stuff I love about Miami so much. Definitely a lot more food options. The vibe is a lot more local, if that makes any sense. I feel like at Indian Wells, a lot of people travel to go to Indian Wells. So there's more of an international vibe. There's more of a sense of people making a trip to go out to Indian Wells versus Miami, where I feel like there's so much more of a local crowd. And it's sort of like, oh, let's just pop down to the tennis center and watch some tennis vibes going on. It's
from what I've heard, the Miami crowd does include a lot of Latin American fans who have traveled.
True. It does have, but then Miami is also a city that has a huge Latin American population as well. So it's, I think, a mix of both. Yes, I think there are some that travel over, but Miami has a huge Latin American population. I think Spanish is basically what you hear on the streets of Miami as well. So I don't know. It just definitely felt more of a local tournament that someone could just pop over to than, say, Indian Wells, which felt more isolated. It's in the desert. It's nowhere close to the biggest city, which would be Los Angeles. It's like a 3-hour drive. So it definitely, that was, I think, the biggest difference, I would say. I know a lot of people talk about the impermanency of the tournament, like it's not a permanent venue. But they have to work with what they have, and I didn't mind it so much. I will say the main stadium, not my favorite. The viewing angles are weird. It's just not a place where I would want to watch tennis. I already don't like watching tennis at bigger stadiums, but that one in particular, it's so weirdly set up because they have to set it up within an existing structure that it's not really, I think, the best for viewing tennis as a
And
fan.
what I would say is, actually, when you think about it, because I've been thinking about it a little bit when trying to maybe talk a bit about some of the smaller tournaments, it's actually, when you look at 250s for sure, and maybe most 500s, there is this temporary feel. It's a temporary event that's been set up. I mean, I've only ever been to two tennis tournaments, Wimbledon and Birmingham International, which is a 250. And the vibes are very, very different, where Wimbledon is this facility designed and built around being a tennis event, whereas Birmingham is being set, and this is Birmingham, UK, not Birmingham, Alabama, by the way, in case there was any doubt about that. It is at a local tennis club where there's actually multiple courts on different surfaces, but they've built a stand around one specific court that they've obviously designed to be that. But like the other courts just look like you could go and play there as a club member or even pay an extortionate fee as a non-member to play on.
Yeah.
And you've got that feel. Like Miami takes that a step further of being, it's a sports venue, not just a tennis venue, and it's all that. But I think actually the Birmingham and Miami experience is probably far more common. But what I'm describing here is probably more so the difference between Indian Wells and Miami, which is how you described. And I think it's not a surprise to me that Indian Wells is somewhere that you specifically travel for, because that's what it markets as. It's in the middle of nowhere. There is not going to be the local interest. So it calls itself Tennis Paradise. It's like, come to Indian Wells to experience tennis. And that's why it has that fifth slam feel, because the slams do the same thing. Most other tennis events don't do that, apart from maybe the very, very sort of established Masters 1000s.
Right. No, you're totally right. It is a very similar vibe. I've also heard, for example, Estoril is a tournament that's happening right now, is also something that's sort of built up at a location. So it's not odd, but I think a lot of people just are longing for sort of a memory of a place that was beautiful, but I think is almost something that really didn't exist, because they're all the issues that people have already talked about why the Miami Open had to move from its old location. But so yeah, that was basically the experience. We didn't really talk about the winners of the event. It was won by Jannik Sinner and Danielle Collins. I think the story of Danielle Collins and what she's going through right now, you're going to talk about a little bit more later in this episode. So we'll just leave that. But Jannik Sinner, he's having quite the run. And what I love the most about this run he's having is that I think last year he went through a time where a lot of commentators that I was listening to, or podcasts that I was listening to, were kind of like, well, we hyped up this guy and look at him. He's not really doing much. Carlos Alcaraz is winning all these Grand Slams, and what has Sinner done? And he's just been going through this sort of slow and steady improvement that I think all of a sudden has just come into fruition starting at the end of last year into this year. And I'm just happy for him, because I think he did definitely have a lot of doubters there the first part of last year, where everyone, especially when he lost first round of the French Open, everyone was kind of like, oh, I don't think he'll ever come to be what he's supposed to be. And he just kept working at it. And I love seeing that in athletes who, they don't listen to the noise. They don't pay attention to all of that. They just kind of keep moving forward, because that's just how sports is. I think you can't just, unlike Carlos Alcaraz, who I guess popped out of the womb with a racket in hand, I think it takes a lot of times for players to develop. We didn't really, I don't know if we talked a little bit about what Grigor Dimitrov was doing, for example. Like, this is the best year, I think, of his career, and he's 32. So I think it does take time sometimes for athletes to develop into their own and find what it is, what motivation they need and all that stuff. But great for Jannik Sinner, good win. And I guess he's never losing again is what we're
Let's see what clay brings, right? But what you're describing there, I've actually said this somewhere else, but I want to talk about it here. And again, this is Nick's tennis history brain going into gear. It's very similar to what happened with Roger Federer. very early in his career. Roger Federer arrived in the early 2000s, like 2000, 2001, and everyone was talking about this kid with a lot of talent, a lot of potential. He beat Pete Sampras at Wimbledon. For those of you who maybe not old enough to know about that, that was a big deal because Sampras had won 7 out of 8 years and he was practically unbeatable at the place. And like, okay, this kid's going to do amazing things. He then wins only one Masters 1000 in 2002. And then everyone's going, right, is this kid ever going to fulfill this potential? Boom, Federer wins Wimbledon in 2003, kicks off with an Australian Open in 2004, and suddenly becomes this unstoppable force that another kid who practically popped out of the room holding a tennis racket, Rafael Nadal, was the only one who could really stop like a couple of years later. And I see, while they're very different game styles wise, and there's a lot of elements of the story, the overall arc is very similar to what happened. I'm not going to necessarily, that's the only comparison I'm going to make between Sinner and Federer, but I think there's a similarity there that maybe everyone else should be scared of.
Watch out, the kids are coming. But yeah, so, that was the Miami Open. That was, Ground Pass on location. I really did enjoy, it was such a last minute decision to do the sort of Ground Pass on site episodes. I hope everyone liked them, but I just instinctively started doing it and it was really fun. And if we attend other tournaments, we will keep that going. But I think what it also did is it kind of kept everyone up to date with what was going on with the tennis. Now, we are a bi-weekly podcast, and just with my schedule, Nick's schedule, that's what we can absorb right now. We can't become a weekly podcast at the moment. But the mini pods that I did while I was on tour, in quotations, were actually very easy to produce. They were sort of 10 to 15 minutes long, really quick, just one take, put a little intro on it and put it out there, and it kept people up to date. So I think it is something we want to keep going. And it will also help that not every 2 weeks we come here and like, okay, here are the 1,400 events that happened in the last 2 weeks, and try and jam everything into one episode that's supposed to be an hour long. So we're going to start a weekly and every other week mini pod. So basically, in between our main bi-weekly podcast, we're going to have a mini pod that we're going to alternate between Nick and I. They'll be 10 to 15 minutes long, updating you with what happened in the week, because there's a tennis tournament happening every single week, multiple tennis tournaments happening every single week. And I think it will help keep you all informed, and also be something that we can manage with our current workload. So I hope you will be excited. We've kind of been doing a little bit of it. It hasn't been quite consistent on our Instagram, where I would do this little like This Week in Tennis, little like reel on Instagram. But that's what we're basically going to do. We're going to move This Week in Tennis to the podcast form, and that will be on all of our social medias and you can listen to it. And I think it will be a great kind of recap that will keep our bi-weekly episodes shorter. So stay tuned for that. And as Nick also mentioned in the beginning, we do have a website now. We have a website, we have an email. I will put them in the show notes of this episode so that you can check it out. We're not going to sort of make promises, right, Nick?
Nope.
We're not going to make promises of what's going to be on the website or anything like that.
Other than the podcast.
Stay tuned. Other than the podcast. Yes, the podcast will definitely be on the website. But as to anything else that will become of the website, stay tuned. Yeah. Stay tuned and see what comes of it. We have an email address, which we would love for you to email us at. Send us questions, send us reviews. And hopefully once we get questions and things like that, we'll also use it for other things. Stay tuned. But we would love to hear your questions and read them out on episodes and stuff. So all that will be in the show notes. And now it's on to
Well,
Clay.
before we do that, because I do want to talk about clay. I'm really excited to talk about clay. I just want to say, this might feel like some kind of presentation to the shareholders, as it were, of the plans for the podcast, or some kind of internal meeting that you've suddenly
We
listening on.
have shareholders? That would be so
That would
great.
be, yeah, maybe that was an overly corporate example, but there you go. Insight into my job. The um, the main thing we want to say is like, hey, tell us what you think. Is this what you want to listen to? Because like one of the things that I was very conscious of was when recording these was like, hey, we're trying to update you on 6 to 12 tournaments in an episode, and it felt like it was dragging on a bit, and we were and I was worried it was content saturation. But hey, maybe you absolutely loved that, and you were like, no, I love my info dump. But like anything to do with the podcast that you like that we're changing or things you want us to keep, do tell us. Like, especially when you're giving us a rating on a podcast app or YouTube or whatever. Like, we are open to feedback. Just please be nice and please be constructive.
Please.
That's all I ask.
Please be nice and constructive.
Because we will ignore you if you're not.
Pretty much. We don't play those games.
Yes, clay. Which we've had a little bit of it already in the season on the men's side, like in the South American swing, and we kind of skimmed over it because that's not the dominant surface and there's a lot of going on. But yeah, hopefully from listening to us, you've kind of gathered, if you are a newer fan, that there's more than one surface to play tennis on, and it's not just a hard court like you find in your local park, if you're lucky enough to have a tennis court in your local park. There are other surfaces, grass, which you associate with Wimbledon, and clay. And of course, the first thing when I tell people that, yes, they play tennis on clay, the first thing that they think of is mud. Like this idea that they're playing tennis on this really muddy, stodgy surface, and they're wondering how on earth you're actually able to perform. Clay is not actually mud. It's called dirt. It gets a bit messy, especially when the players fall over, but it's actually made of crushed brick. And it's been a surface that's been around for about 100 years and specifically associated with Europe. So France, Italy, Spain, their players kind of develop and grow up on clay, but also Germany, Eastern Europe, particularly like places like Romania, like that's what Poland is where that's the surface that they're used to when they grow up on, whereas most of us would probably be used to hard courts, our local club. There are clay courts in the US and the UK. I mean, the UK did once have a tour event on clay decades ago. The US still has a US men's clay court championship, which is happening right now in Houston. But clay is a very, very, it's a different surface. It's a slower speed because it's so dirty. So the ball kicks higher and moves slower as a result. So you're going to get a lot of longer rallies. That's something that you're going to have to get used to when you start watching clay. These are going to be longer, much more grueling rallies. The movement is very different. You're going to see players sliding into shots a lot more because the surface is so loose. I don't know whether this appeals to you amateurs who want to have a go or not, but I certainly would love to one day have a crack at clay. But yeah, I want to start here. Like, do you have any fondness for the surface?
I love clay. Love clay. And it's so funny because all the things I love about clay are elements that are now coming into hard court tennis. But I remember the first time I watched a clay tournament and just watched the players slide from one end to the other and just the movement of it. And I was so enthralled by it. And there's so much more, quote unquote, variety of the shots that you can play on clay. I think players tend to have a lot more. I mean, it's funny because I think as an American, most American players just do not like clay. It's a fact.
I would like to say most American male players don't like clay.
True. Most American male players don't like clay.
I am gonna do the Andy Murray male player thing.
Andy Murray. That's another topic for another day. But anyway, but I've always loved clay. I love the surface. I love that they get dirty. I don't know. There's such of a grueling workmanship involved in playing clay court tennis that I really love. And this is my favorite time of the year. I have to say the US Open is my favorite Grand Slam just because it's my home Grand Slam. But it's such a big tie between Wimbledon and Roland Garros, because there's something about natural surfaces. And I think I also have this love and affinity, I think, for grass as well. But I just love the natural surfaces much more than I love hard court. So this is my favorite time of year. There's some things I don't like about it, I will say. And we can start getting into that. But here's the thing. So if you've been watching the first half of the year, hard court, you've probably gotten used to things like Hawkeye or the electronic line calling. And sort of I think it makes the game a little bit more predictable. Your ball is in, your ball is out. There's no sort of argument about
It's streamlined.
That's what the machine said. It's very streamlined. And then you get to clay. And then there's this moment that I dread every time I'm watching a match on clay, is when the ball we're not sure if it's in or out. The player is looking down at dirt at a mark, and there are like 100 marks there. And then the umpire comes down, and then they're all staring at a mark on the dirt. And I'm just like, there must be a better way. But I think so right now for clay tournaments, electronic line calling is not a widely used method on clay courts. And that sort of system isn't there yet. So as much as I love clay, when it comes to sort of technical parts of the scoring system of tennis, this season definitely gives me some agita for sure.
Yeah. So just to be clear then, like what's happening here is, Hawkeye isn't confirming, or whatever the other one's called, the competitor to Hawkeye, because I just think of Hawkeye. There isn't a series of cameras looking at a section of the line, and we're seeing whether the ball has missed the line or not, whether it's inside or outside the court. They are basing on whether there is a mark left by the ball in the dirt that the umpire has to come down and check if a player thinks it's the opposite. So that's what's going on there. I do agree it does slow things down. It does add an element of drama, particularly with some of the crowds you get on clay, because that's one of the other things about clay you have to get used to, is that we're into a very sort of different vibe of crowd. Like, don't get me wrong, American crowds can be rowdy, but it's rowdy in a different way, because there's this almost sarcasticness to an Italian or French or Spanish crowd. And there's a lot of sort of whistling and chanting as things are being checked or things kind of go off, and they kind of feed off conflict in a very different way. So that kind of adds to it in some respects. But yes, it does slow things down when an umpire has to get off the chair and check it. I think they did say at one point they couldn't do it because the surface isn't fixed. But I think with the way the technology is advanced, they can do that. And I think Madrid might have it. I think Rome's experimented with it for sure.
Yeah,
Stuttgart in
I
the
believe
WTA
they did last
has
year.
it as well.
Yeah, so it's coming, but it's definitely slow coming, and it's one of the things where I definitely have issues with the clay tournaments, but
it makes them cheaper to run.
They're happening right now.
It makes them cheaper to run because you don't have to invest loads of money in setting up all these cameras and tech. In many ways, clay is probably the cheapest surface to look after.
Yeah. It's one of those things too where rain delays, I think, are not as bad. I remember I was watching, we'll get into the tournaments that are playing right now, but I think Estoril had a few days of really bad rain. But in the beginning, it was just drizzles. And because it's clay that also has to be wet periodically anyway, they just kept playing, which I was like, oh, on a hard court, they would have definitely stopped playing and waited for the drizzle to end, but they just kept on going. But yes, so clay season started. The tournaments are already, the first round of tournaments are ending today. They're having their finals a lot for the most part. But on the ATP side, we'll be talking about two tournaments here, which are the biggest ones that have been happening. I will throw in Marrakesh, which is a smaller tournament happening as well, just because there are great things happening there. But Houston is the U.S. clay tournament. It is the only men's U.S. clay tournament stateside. And Estoril, which is a 250, a very beloved 250 actually, that is happening in Portugal right now. It looks like a really beautiful location. It's currently not on the calendar after this year. I think they're still working on it, but it seems there's a lot of love for the Estoril.
Yes, there really is. And I think it's something to do with the fact the tournament really, it has a great vibe. Like the crowd's always full, and there's an element where it looks like it's trying to be ambitious, even though it's a 250. Like there's like so many great facilities there, even if it's very temporary. Again, it's not sort of like, I think it's a very small tennis facility. I don't know if it's an actual club, but the tennis courts there are pretty permanent. And yeah, there's definitely this sense of actually it's an important part of the calendar. And even if they don't come back next year, 2026 should be on the line. And I think it's something that the players will miss. I think they like it. I think there's definitely that sense of it's one of the better tournaments that comes across on the TV. And I think, there's good to have different tennis elements in different countries, like Portugal, although it's never produced a world leading tennis player in its history. There's still a few out there. Like they've got Nuno Borges, who's top 100. He's got a few good wins this year, beat Grigor Dimitrov at the Australian Open. One of the kind of leading tennis journalists, also the most popular tennis journalist, is Portuguese, Jose Morgado. So there is that. And, I was thinking about sort of clay as a thing. And actually, regardless of what's going on in Houston right now, I think clay, particularly the European clay season, has this kind of, if you're thinking as a fan of going to it, if you're from the US or UK, probably less of a thing if you're on mainland Europe. If you are, hello, please let us know if you're listening. It's basically going to be like a European holiday with some tennis if you go, because
with some tennis,
most of the feedback we get, like I've been getting about these tournaments, is great scenery. Like there's a beach nearby. It's warm weather. Like it's all the kind of things that you would go on holiday to Europe for, with some tennis thrown in. And that's kind of the joy of it. And it kind of harks back to the very, very old days of tennis 100 years ago, where the quote tour, there were two, one in the US and one around the French Riviera and the UK. And that was it. That was like, if you were a tennis player, that's what you did. You just went on this cycle around, from like one of those sort of continents, depending where you were born.
Yeah.
So there's that also element of like, this is what tennis just traditionally feel like. But I think going back to it, like I think Estoril fits into, hey, why don't we go on holiday to Portugal and watch some tennis? And same thing.
And watch some
like,
tennis.
Same thing like holiday in Spain or France or Italy.
No, yeah. And that's what they all look like. Like I've been looking at some pictures. Coming up next is Monte Carlo, and just be looking at sort of people's pictures of the stadium, which then overlooks the ocean. And you're just like, that has to be what paradise looks like, because some tennis and some water with the beach. That's all you need. That's all you need in life. But yeah, going back to the tennis. So Houston and Estoril are happening. The defending champion in Houston is Frances Tiafoe. If you've been following along since I think the end of his run at the US Open, Frances Tiafoe has not exactly been having a good time on tour. His run of form has not been great. And he is back in the finals of Houston. And it's actually really nice to see. You could tell he was fighting so hard every single match to get back to the finals. But who he meets in the finals, which will be today, we're going to be done recording, so the results will come after this recording. He is playing Ben Shelton. He's playing Ben Shelton in the finals of Houston, and I can't help but think that the results of this match will be so significant for one player, because Ben Shelton is the person who kicked Tiafoe out of the US Open last year during the quarterfinals. Ben Shelton is the new young American just making waves through the tour. He went from last year being his very first year on tour, made it to 2 semifinals of Grand Slams, and he is now the second highest ranked American on tour, all of in all in the space of a year. And Frances Tiafoe is more of a veteran who's been on tour for a while. So this is the thing I love about tennis. There are all these like really interesting storylines that you can so get involved in. And I'm really looking forward to this final to see what the results will be. I think Ben Shelton, it's not only his best result, I mean, it's his best result on clay, basically. Last year, he played for the first time on clay. He decided to go straight to Estoril, actually. So Estoril was his first tournament on clay last year. And this year, he switched it up. He decided to stay stateside. And I think it was the best idea for him, because I just think the field, he had a much better chance with the field at this tournament than he probably would have in Estoril. So good on him for making a good scheduling decision. And I'm really excited for this final. I thought I would watch Estoril a little bit more, and I did like the first day, but I kind of fell off because of what was happening on the WTA side, which I'm going to let Nick talk about right after. But the finals of Estoril, which will also be happening later, are between Hubie Hurkacz and Pedro Martinez. And again, another great storyline. This is Hubie's first final at a clay tournament. He's someone who's been on tour forever. He's finally back in the top 10 and is doing so well. So this is a really great result for him. And Pedro Martinez, his semifinal match against Casper Ruud, which I got to watch I rewatched it last night. I mean, it's why I love clay. It was such a grind fest. The sort of balance of the match kept swaying back and forth, and you were like, who's going to win? You never know. And that last set was just such a grind. I think Pedro tried to serve it out, and he got broken, and then Casper held. I mean, it was such a fun match to watch. It was really long, but that's clay court tennis for you. So it'll be a great final. Again, I didn't really sort of latch on to this tournament really, other than the first day. But they have a great final, and I'm excited to see who wins this one. But let's
before we go
push that all aside.
Before we go to my section, I do have one question.
Yes.
Yes. If you are an American fan, and I appreciate you've probably never been to Houston, but if you're an American fan who's actually looking to experience clay, would Houston be a good option? And by the way, if you're a listener and you've been to Houston, please let us know what it's like.
Yes, please. Now, I think before I watched Charleston this year, which is coming up, which is a WTA tournament that's happening on clay right now, I would have said, oh yeah, definitely go down to Houston, especially because, which Nick will bring up in a second, the clay is very different at Charleston from any other clay tournament. So if you wanted to get the experience of what European clay possibly is like, but you can't make it to Roland Garros this year, or you can't make it to Estoril, I would definitely say go to Houston, see what red clay looks like and what a clay tournament is like, and experience that. And I hope I can get to do that, sometime in the future. But you can't really beat Charleston right now. So, I mean, Nick, you cannot beat Charleston.
Charleston's a bigger scale event. Let's talk about it. So Charleston, before we go into results, Charleston actually has a bit more tennis history to it. Much bigger stadium than Houston, a bit more of a permanent looking tennis venue. Certainly, it's quite interesting. Like, this massive stadium's got this clubhouse attached to it, which is this interesting vibe. And yeah, the clay is very different. So when we think of clay, you think of a red or orange tennis court, sort of slow bouncing, quite dusty. Charleston's different. Charleston is green clay. Now, I don't know how they make it. I probably should have looked into this, but Charleston's green clay, and it kind of plays as somewhere between as a transition between hard court and a clay court. So made of clay, but the bounce is more like on a hard court to experience for the players, and that's great. So a lot of WTA players go down, not just because it's a 500 event, so it's technically the highest ranking event of the week, but not only because it's like a really big event and it's got quite a big draw, but also it's actually quite a useful period for you to gradually get used to clay, having come just off Miami, which a few players have done. So that's what it is. Like Charleston at one point was a 1000 back in the 2000s, before they upgraded. I think it was after they upgraded Indian Wells, and they ended up having 3 1000s on the bounce, which is crazy to think of. But yeah, Charleston's got a lot of tennis history. Like they've been putting up like past winners on at changes of ends, and you're looking at players like Venus Williams has won there, Serena Williams has won there, Justine Henin, like the big players from the 2000s. But yeah, Charleston just looks like a place that a lot of people have a lot of good things to say about in terms of the vibe. It's somewhere that like has a great stadium, got a great sort of tennis history to it, knowledgeable fans. One of the heaviest security events I've ever seen. I don't think I've ever seen, like, I can't remember Indian Wells or Miami having like full on armed police officers on the court. I don't know whether that's a Southern thing, but that's that was somewhat okay. I'm hoping this is just something that they just do rather than feel the need to do. So that's somewhat intimidating for me as a Brit, who is not used to that kind of sight. But it's definitely a tournament that I would be curious about attending. So yeah, if you want to like get one more big US event on the calendar and this kind of fits in with your schedule, or you live not too far from Charleston, I would definitely suggest checking it out. Do you have anything to say on Charleston's event before I go?
I mean, yeah, because what I would say for sure, from just what I've seen on social media, I haven't really seen that many fans who are currently in Houston talking about like the vibes of Houston or what the event is like. I have seen 10 times more people talk about Charleston. That made me have so much FOMO because I was like, oh, I want to be there too. It just seems like it is so geared to the fans, and the location is geared to the fans, and there are all these like events happening and stuff. And I made a little tournament guide. And in my research to the tournament guide, I realized that Charleston has been voted the best 500 event on the WTA 2 years running now. And that there has to be something to it. And it is definitely going on my calendar as a place to visit, probably before Houston.
There we go. So you go. That's your US clay event recommendation. Go to Charleston first.
Yes.
And certainly the American fans have been thoroughly enjoying Charleston this week. So kind of, we've had 2 Americans in the semifinals. Jessica Pegula seems to have got her year back on track. She was the top seed. She made the semifinals, kind of fighting her way through that draw. She beat Amanda Anisimova. She ended up having to beat Victoria Azarenka in a deciding set tiebreak. I think she had to beat Anisimova in a deciding set tiebreak as well. And it took a deciding set tiebreak to take her down in the semifinals. Sloane Stephens showed up and played some great tennis, former US Open champion. But of course, the story of this tournament was the same.
And Sloane, and before you go on, Sloane is actually in the doubles final.
Yes, she is with. Is it? It's Ashlyn Kruger.
Yes.
Kruger.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm sure it's Ashlyn Kruger. So there was a doubles fight. Yeah, they're going to have an American team in the doubles fight. They're taking on the Kitchenok sisters from Ukraine in the final. So it's basically imagine like an Olympic doubles event between Ukraine and the US as your final.
Yeah.
So With Charleston, yeah, I guess the big story is Danielle Collins is in the final and she's on a win streak. She's now won 12 consecutive matches, which is incredible. 12 matches in 3 weeks, and she has decimated the draw. She had a little bit of a wobble against Ons Jabeur, where she kind of went off the ball in the second set, and Ons made it a fight. But even against, like in the semi-finals against Maria Sakkari yesterday, Sakkari has been having a good month. Like Indian Wells final, quarterfinals of Miami, didn't have much of an answer. Did her very best, but didn't have much of an answer for the tennis that Collins has been producing. And you know, Collins, we know, is a good player. She's reached an Australian Open final before, but she's putting it all together. I think I'll probably talk a little bit more of the significance of that a little bit later on, which you might, if you're a regular listener, you probably figure out why. But so again, that final's not happened yet. That's going to happen, and it's going to be between Collins and Kasatkina. But if Collins wins that, that's going to be one of the most significant win streaks that's happened in sort of recent years, up there with Coco Gauff's win streak in 2023 on the US hard courts when she won the US Open, or maybe even Iga Swiatek's famous clay streak back in 2022. Yeah, Danielle Collins is the story of women's tennis right now.
Yeah, I think I tweeted this, but I was saying I was so, ever since we've actually started this podcast, Nick, which I'm so grateful for you, even before we started the podcast, like basically introducing me to more WTA tennis and, who the players are, getting to know them better, all that stuff. I still, I was like, I'll watch 1 or 2 matches in Charleston, but my focus is Estoril in Houston. And it completely took over my tennis watching this week. I could not get my eyes off of the matches that were happening in Charleston. The vibes were great. It was a Monday afternoon and the center court was packed. Like, they have really great fans in Charleston, and the tennis lived up to what the fans were bringing as well, that it's just been such an exciting ride watching that. And I really hope, if you haven't been watching the tournament, at least try and watch the finals. And now I'm excited for Stuttgart. Yeah. I'm like, oh my goodness, what's Stuttgart going to bring? Because we haven't seen Iga since, Miami. We haven't seen Coco since Miami. So I'm just like, or Arena. So now I'm just like, and then Danielle Collins is going to go to Stuttgart, I think. What's going to happen?
Okay, Stuttgart is like, I think we should talk about properly when we get into our previews. But
yeah,
Collins is not set for Stuttgart. We'll go into why when we get there.
Is she not?
No, I'll explain when we get there. Anastasia.
Okay. Okay, fine.
But I wanted to say about Charleston, like going back to that. So I've been keeping a sort of best matches of the season tracker because I'm a nerd and who likes spreadsheets. And but also partly because we like to do end of season roundup on some of the other podcasts I'm involved in. And generally what I've based that off is sometimes it's off a match that I've watched, but I can't watch every match. So basic, it's like, has this match got a buzz on social media / are there certain people who I follow who I respect the opinion of telling me that was a really, really good match? It's usually, and Charleston has had at least one of those a day. I think there's only been one dud a day this entire tournament. Because we had, like just an example, like some of these it didn't even happen. Like opening day, people were talking about this as like, no one's going to remember this because these are 2 really low ranked players. Katie Voyets of the US beat Arantxa Rus of.
Wow, that happened.
At the very beginning of the tournament, in a really, really dramatic, tense end of the match where both players had match point, and Rus actually stopped playing at one point because she thought that a ball from Voyets was out on match point, and it wasn't, and Voyets ended up winning the match. It was super crazy and dramatic, but like, these are 2 players who have never won a Grand Slam, never been anywhere near winning one. and they both produced an incredible match. From what I can gather, we had Pegula playing Anisimova, Pegula playing Azarenka, Azarenka playing Townsend, Pegula Kasatkina yesterday. You can tell there's certain players who really showed up and brought the entertainment. Danielle Collins as well, like even though she wasn't getting into close matches, the tennis she was producing, has been stunning to watch. I've just been in awe of it. That's the other reason why Charleston has been special this week, is that, you know, there's been a lot of really memorable tennis and exciting tennis going on in this court. So yeah, I was hyped for this tournament before. I'm definitely going to be hyped for when it comes back around next year. I guess I'm started. Do you want to start previewing the upcoming tournaments?
Yes. So what's coming up? What's coming up next week is on the ATP side, we have Monte Carlo, which is from April 7th to the 14th. And then right after that, Monte Carlo, by the way, is a 1,000 level event only for the men. So it's not a mixed event. And then Barcelona and Munich are coming up afterwards. Barcelona is a 500 event. Munich is a 250. And they're going to be on the same week on the 15th and the 21st of April. Andre Rublev won Monte Carlo last year. Carlos Alcaraz won Barcelona last year. And Holger Rune won Munich last year. So this is now, it's so crazy how it happens because it almost comes in really quick succession. You have this Monte Carlo Masters and you have these events, and then, you know, we go on to the 1,000, and before you know it, it's the French Open, you know, so it's really a really quick build. This is the beginning of it, of all the events that are leading up to the French Open. We will obviously, so next week, because we're not going to do a full episode next week, we'll have a mini pod for you to recap what's happened that week. And then we'll come back to you with all the others. But I'm excited for Monte Carlo. You know, again, the whole field is back there. It's a 1,000 level event. It's not mandatory. It's the one Masters event that's non-mandatory on the ATP side. So you're not going to see Ben Shelton there. He decided to play Houston and he's not going over. But Carlos Alcaraz is back. Jannik Sinner is back. Novak Djokovic is back. So you'll have a lot of the big name players playing in Monte Carlo. Carlos Alcaraz missed the event last year because he had a wrist injury. So we'll see how he does this year at the event.
And there's question marks whether he will at the minute, because he seems to have hurt his arm again.
Again, you know, we love our little injured Carlos Alcaraz. He always has little niggles here and there. But, you know, Jannik Sinner is back. We haven't seen this version of Jannik Sinner on clay before, so it'll be really interesting to see how he plays in Monte Carlo.
Because for context, Sinner's weakest results, apart from one or two kind of interesting peaks, have been on clay.
Yeah. So, I mean, he was out the first round of the French Open last year. So, but we just haven't seen. Oh, was it second round?
It was a really, really good match.
Are we sure? It was a really good match with Daniel Altmaier was who kicked him out of the French Open. First or second round. It was very early either way. It was, you know, it was kind of the story of Jannik Sinner and Daniil Medvedev, who also exited the French Open early last year. But, you know, it'll be interesting to see where Holger Rune is at. I think he's had a very sort of shaky year. He is back with his favorite coach. So let's see. I think this... these first few tournaments on the clay will dictate a lot, especially since, again, I keep saying this because I love it, it's an Olympic year, and this year the Olympics is being played on clay.
It is being played on clay at the same site as the French Open. So this is now a doubly big year for those who are dreaming of an Olympic medal like Novak Djokovic. It's the one tennis prize he hasn't won, like singles or doubles. What is interesting about Monte Carlo, I think, especially if you're coming as a fan, is this is probably the most, in theory, wide open tournament, Masters 1000 you can get. Partly because it's not mandatory, partly because it's everyone's getting used to their clay seasons. But with, you know, the last couple of years, Djokovic and Alcaraz haven't been much of contenders at the event. Djokovic keeps losing early at this event in recent years. He is playing, but he's like managing expectations with that. Alcaraz, as we said, is injured. Sinner on clay. This version of Sinner is untested, which means that players like Rublev, who's defending champion, Rune, who narrowly lost the final last year, Tsitsipas has won the event twice, Alexander Zverev, who really likes clay. All these guys, Casper Ruud, who is, very well established clay court specialist, they're going to be looking at this going, I've got a shot here. And I think if you're looking for a new winner in amongst the same old names of Carlos Alcaraz and Jannik Sinner, who we keep talking about, this might be the opportunity for you. I say this, who knows? Maybe Alcaraz and Sinner will end up winning it
in the final.
Yeah, but that I'd say this is and it also gets you kind of warmed up. By the way, I was going to ask Anastasia, might be worth putting that article that our friend James wrote about a couple of years ago about his visit to Monte Carlo, and put it in the show notes.
Oh yeah.
He went to Monte Carlo year, a couple of years ago as a fan, and he's from the UK, so he had to really plan that trip. And he put lots of really helpful advice in that article. I would recommend giving it a read if you're watching Monte Carlo and going, yeah, you know what? I fancy a holiday in the French Riviera around April.
Who doesn't? Who doesn't? But okay, so what tournaments are coming up for the WTA? We have a few.
None. Well, that's a lie. So when you say in the next 2 weeks, we have a couple. Technically, there is no WTA tournament happening this week because it's a Billie Jean King Cup week.
Yes, it is.
We have, I guess there's a few ties, like it's sort of the qualifying rounds for the finals that are going to be held later this year, and held in different locations around the world. So if you are an American fan, good news, the US are playing. And if you want to see a guaranteed American win, you're in luck because they're playing Belgium. Now, no disrespect to Belgium, who historically do produce good players. The problem was that none of them signed up for the team. Elise Mertens, who is a top 30 WTA player, is not taking part. There's no Belgian players in the top 100, and they're coming up against a team of Coco Gauff, Jessica Pegula, Madison Keys, Taylor Townsend, Emma Navarro, all of whom are very well established, very, very good players. Most of the top 20 players. I think Townsend is the only one who's not. If you want,
let's just hope Nick hasn't jinxed them.
Yeah, that would be deep. Do you know what? That would be the shock of the Billie Jean King Cup if Belgium pull off a win.
Because remember, it would be. But remember last year, I think it was the Davis Cup where Slovakia, I think, defeated Serbia. Where it was just the upset of upsets, but so hopefully Nick hasn't jinxed
Finland
them.
Take out the Davis Cup. I remember them surprising someone.
Oh yeah, Finland did. Who was it? Was it France?
It was France, or was it the US?
Did Finland take out? I think it was the US. And it was like Francis Tiafoe, Taylor Fritz. And I don't think Tommy Paul was there, but at least it was Francis Tiafoe and Taylor Fritz. So yes, hopefully Nick hasn't jinxed that, but it seems like they have a good chance.
They've got a couple of decent players. Like Emil Ruusuvuori's established top 100, has been a thorn in the side. It ended up being Otto Virtanen here. But we're off on a massive tangent here. The point is, yes, that is possible, and Belgium could have the match of lives. And look, 20 years ago, you could have had this as the Williams sisters versus the Enan Kleisters duo, which would have been an epic tie. If you think about it, that would be like that World Cup soccer final that happened between Argentina and France a couple of years back.
Yes.
But we don't have that this time because this is 2024, not 2004. I don't know exactly where they're playing, but check it out. See.
And if I find the links of locations and stuff, because there are few happening, I'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, I'd say sort of, as we said, we're expecting our audience to be mainly US and UK. So I'm going to be mainly talking about them. But obviously, if a few of you get in touch and say, I'm French, or I'm German, or I'm Australian, then of course we'll start mentioning your countries a lot more. But yeah, the Brits are abroad. The Brits are going away for their time. They're going to France. That's going to be that's a tough one for the Brits because the French have got Caroline Garcia, who is on her day very, very good, like world beating. I actually went to watch GB versus France in GB, and they did cause us some problems. There. Now, to be fair, GB have got Katie Bolter on the side now. I think Raducanu's playing. So if the British girls step up, they're going to cause problems for the French. Like if the Brits are on it, it's going to be a very, very close tie. That's the one I'm going to be keeping an eye on, partly because it's also on, it's on the BBC. France versus GB is on the BBC, whereas all the other Billie Jean King Cup matches are on a different streaming platform that I usually have. So I'll be I'll be watching that. But I would say if you want to enjoy a competitive tie, even if you're not French or British, check out France versus GB because that could be a lot of fun. Yeah. So following week, so we already talked about Stuttgart, which is a 500. Stuttgart is a crazy draw. So it's an indoor clay event sponsored by Porsche. So if you watch it, there are 3 Porsches right next to the court, like on display, in full view of the camera. It feels like an out of the WTA finals in terms of it's indoors, there's the spectacle, there's the flashing lights, and they're hyping up every single player. And the draw is stacked. Like, it's only 32 player draw, but most of the top 20 is there. Like, it's insane, which is why I was saying Danielle Collins isn't guaranteed. Danielle Collins, to play in Stuttgart, would have to go through qualifying.
Which is crazy. But that's how rankings work.
Yeah, because like her ranking was below the 50s when she entered the tournament. And obviously it's not there now. I think she's definitely going to be top 20 now, regardless of the outcome of the Charleston final. But Stuttgart is so competitive to get into. It's really tricky. So like someone like Collins, who's in the form of her life, would have to do qualifying to get in. But you've got all the top players: Swiatek, Sabalenka, Coco Gauff, Elena Rybakina. They're all going to be there. Jessica Gulu's going to be there. They've given wild cards to Angie Kerber and Emma Raducanu. It's a big event. They go all out to attract the big stars, and they all go because the winner gets a Porsche, and who doesn't want that?
Who doesn't want that? I saw on their social media they just released the car that the players are going to be getting, and it's so nice. It's the perfect gray color. It's just so nice. So yeah, I would go to the event, and this would be the event I would want to win. I'd be like, I want to win this event.
Get down there, Anastasia. Get into qualifying.
Going.
Why not give it a try? I mean, like, it's not unusual. Like, we have had that kind of prize before. It's not as weird as that one time Roger Federer won a cow at a Swiss tournament, but that's a whole nother story.
And then we have one more.
Yes, so that's Rouen, which is a 250. Now, that one is going to be less of a big deal compared to Stuttgart because it doesn't have as many top players, but there's still some stories of interest in there. Not least when you look at the wild cards that are in the draw, specifically because Naomi Osaka's playing. She's kicking off her clay season there, and Simona Halep is returning to tennis. So Simona Halep, if you don't know who she is, she won Wimbledon in 2019, French Open in 2018, was world number 1 for a couple of years. But she's recently returning to the tour, having served a ban for a doping offence. But she's one of the big tennis names kind of coming back. So that's kind of in the main interest for Rouen, which is those wild cards and how they do, because obviously Osaka is a big name, but her clay record is not great. It doesn't really suit her game or how she moves. So it's interesting to see maybe how this much more confident, relaxed Osaka approaches it.
Yeah. And these players attending a 250 kind of nicely brings us a little bit into the players of the fortnight. We need to make like some sort of like music to go along. Player of the fortnight. Let's go. But my player of the fortnight is sort of doing something similar to what I think Naomi Osaka, Simona Halep are doing. And I kind of like this version because, you know, players take breaks for different reasons. Having a baby, serving a ban, coming back from injury. And a lot of times, depending on who they are, it's interesting to see how they come back to the tour. If they jump in right away and get wild cards to Grand Slams or 1,000 level events, or if they kind of start slowly. And my player of the fortnight is Matteo Berrettini, who has been out of the game. I think it was his last match he played was when he sprained his ankle at the US Open, which I actually happened to be at the match watching it happen, which was...
That was probably not fun to look at.
It was not fun at all to look at. Sprained ankles are really not, and especially the way tennis, because they're so flexible. Anyway, he's been out of the game for a really long time, and he's finally coming back on tour, and he's starting slowly. His first event in the States was the Challenger in Arizona, which he did really, really well at, and I was pleasantly surprised for him. And here he is. He's playing in the 250 in Marrakesh, which is a clay tournament event in Morocco. And he's in the finals. He made it to the finals. It's going to be happening later on today. And it's been such a great run for him. A player who I would never have said had any sort of, oh, Matteo Berrettini and clay, friends. I would not have said that, for especially the way he plays. He seems more sort of, he's had a lot more success on grass and definitely on hard courts as well. So it's really nice to see him back playing confidently. And, I think there's just this Italian renaissance that's happening now. Every sort of final, semifinal you see these days, or someone having a great run and beating Novak Djokovic, it's an Italian player. They're having a great time. So really happy for Matteo Berrettini. If you don't know who he is, you never know, but I think Matteo Berrettini is definitely one of the players who cross over more to sort of traditional fandom because of the way he looks, he models, he has, fashion contracts and things like that. So I'm sure a lot of people know who Matteo Berrettini is. But as a tennis player, you should also know, and he's a great tennis player, had really great success a few years ago on grass,
Wimbledon final,
winning Queens, and getting to the finals of Wimbledon. So great tennis player. And I'm glad to see him back on tour healthy, which is great. Side note, his brother also made it to the semifinals of a challenger. I don't know if he made it to the finals as well, but he was also doing well the very same week Matteo was. So that was cute.
Matteo is, let's not downplay his clay results. He's made the final of Madrid in his career, Roland Garros quarterfinals, where he took a set off Djokovic. Okay, doesn't suit his game, but he's not bad on it. He's Italian. He would have grown up on clay.
True. That's true. Yeah.
The other thing is, of course, we're kind of putting him as player of the fortnight for the ATP side. We don't even know if he's won the Marrakesh title yet because he's playing in about 5 minutes, actually.
Yeah.
Well, it'd be interesting to see how he does there, but whether he wins it or not, he's back in the top 100, which actually means that depending on how Monte Carlo goes, he's guaranteed in the French Open.
Yeah, which is great. But it's so funny you mentioned that about him not even winning the tournament yet. I definitely think, we can't help who we like as individuals, but I think the player of the fortnight for me is definitely going to become somewhere where I can highlight players who not only had a great week or great tournament, but players who I think our audience should get to know. Because yes, everyone knows who Novak is. Alcaraz, Sinner, Iga, Arena, Rybakina, Naomi Osaka. These are definitely names of players that everyone knows, but there's a top 100. There's a top 100 player count on both sides of the tour. And I think some of the great stories of tournaments come from people who are not in the top 10 and who are playing beautifully. I think one of the revelations for me at Indian Wells was Yuri Lehechka, who's a Czech player who just lit up Indian Wells and was playing really well. And that is a name that I'm now going to follow for the rest of the year. And I think it's fun to do things like that. Unfortunately, he's injured now and he doesn't know when he's coming back.
He injured himself in that great run.
I know. But I love things like that. And I love sort of exposing people to new players. So I'm hoping the player of the fortnight is not always just going to be Carlos and Iga and Yannick Sinner.
I mean, look, I'm going to try and avoid that as well. I do want to try and highlight different players. That being said, sometimes someone has that special fortnight and we'll have to talk about it because they just that just blows everyone out the water. Fortunately, we have someone on the WTA side who fits both criteria because that's Danielle Collins, who hasn't lost since Indian Wells, and
she's not going to lose.
She's
again.
heavy favourite to win in Charleston later today. I'm not going to say she's guaranteed to win because Kasatkina is stubborn as anything. That's kind of the mark of her test. That's how she beat Pegula, was just being stubborn. Like every time Pegula went in front, Kasatkina went, no, you're not beating me. No. And
no.
But Collins is there because she was ranked outside the top 50, went on his raising run, has this great career behind it anyway, well, pretty good career, with these amazing highlights. But what's really significant about this is she's found her best tennis in what is her final year on tour, because she announced after losing to Iga Świątek in Australia, narrowly, that this was going to be her last year on tour. And she's elaborated on why she wants to do that. I know we stick to on court, but I think it kind of, this amplifies it, that no, she's kind of done traveling the world. Like we were talking earlier about, I don't know if I could go on tour all the time. And there are players who don't like the day in, day out. Ash Barty, who was world number one a couple of years back, that's one of the reasons why she quit. She was done with all the traveling despite the success. And Collins is in the same place. She wants to have a family. She has had multiple health issues that makes playing tennis even harder than it already is. And maybe it's playing with that freedom that's to knowing that she's not trying to build a career anymore, that is maybe helping her recently. But regardless of that context, the tennis she's been playing, as I've said before, has been super special, just world-class tennis. If she keeps on like this, she'll be top 10. I don't think she's ever been ranked top 10, but she's definitely already top 20. Yeah. And I think she has a lot of fans because although she's very fiery on court, she has nicknames like Danimal and Danielle because of how loud she can be. But off the court, in interviews, she's one of the most genuinely nice people you can meet. And it's funny seeing that juxtaposition that you can get with a tennis player. But yeah, so that's that. Danielle Collins has to be perfect for it, not just for the tennis that she's playing, but for the story she's telling in the process.
Yeah, definitely. Just to get my sort of take on it is Danielle has never been a player I actually liked. It's so funny because you talked about that juxtaposition, how she is on court, always turned me off slightly. And it wasn't until literally interviewing her in person in Miami that I thought, she's the most down-to-earth, real person. There's nothing sort of phony, athlete-y player, I don't know, PR-ness of her. She literally is just so honest and straightforward, and this is how it is. And that really did change my view on her. And then plus this tennis run she's having, she's playing some really great ball, really has endeared me to her. She's not my favorite player in the whole world, but, I have never had a turnaround like this on a player ever. Usually my first thing to I'm like, that's just what it is. Not every player is for everyone, but I've had a complete turnaround on her and, wishing her the best because like you mentioned, she does have a few personal issues. It's the reason why she is not going to be playing on tour after this year. and you're just wishing her all the best. And what a way to go out. I was listening to another podcast recently talking about how there are all these players who are retiring they're at the end of the career. You have Nadal, you have Murray, and it seems like they all have this sort of idea of how they want to go out, and I think Danielle just casually after a loss was like, yeah, this is my last year. And then it's just winning everything. She won a title. Like, I think players would kill to have this be their sort of exit from the sport, So it's so funny how it's just happened for her, and, wishing her all the best in the future for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So there we go. That is Ground Pass. So we are here. We're not going anywhere. In fact, you'll be getting more of us. Maybe not quite as much as we had during Indian Wells and Miami, but we are very excited to be bringing you all the stories of the clay season. I'm not going to lie, I've had one of the opening matches of Monte Carlo on in the background while I've been recording, because I'm just that obsessed. It's a good match as well. Struff versus Baez, good one there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Tennis is happening all around all the time. Monte Carlo has already started.
It had already started, yeah. And I'm about to switch over to watch Berrettini in the final and see if he can pull off that Marrakesh win. But it's, as always, like I keep saying, like, we're doing this for you guys. I have a lot of fun with Anastasia, mostly because she gives me the opportunity to try and make her laugh, and that's just the best thing ever. But it's also for you listeners as well. So hopefully we get to hear from you after this a little bit more. But yeah, just want to say thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back next week with our mini pod where we round up everything Monte Carlo and Billie Jean King Cup.